Hello and welcome to another Mini Geek Boutique video. I thought I'd do something a bit different this time and talk about one of my heroes, Ada Lovelace, whilst I create a sketchbook page. It's no secret that I have an appreciation of Ada Lovelace. I encountered her a few years ago when I discovered her contribution to the age of Victorian computing and Charles Babbage's analytical engine, all thanks to Ada Lovelace Day every second Tuesday of October. But who was she, and why is she so important, more than 200 years after her birth? And what importance does this Victorian woman have in the modern age of computing? Augusta Ada Lovelace was born in 1815, 150 years before modern computers were developed, and is considered the first computer programmer. She was the only legitimate daughter of Lord and Lady Byron, but she never knew her father, her mother having left the family estate as she was tired of his shenanigans. Byron would never see his daughter again and later died in Europe of fever in 1824. Brought up by her mother, Lady Byron oversaw Ada's education as she was afraid that her daughter would develop Lord Byron's perceived insanity, so she created a strict schedule covering a wide range of subjects including maths, geography, astronomy and music. Ada had a natural affinity with arithmetic, and Ada's mother encouraged this. It was unusual for women in her position to be this well educated. Despite her mother being recognised as an educational reformer, Ada's own learning came through private tutors, studies and friends of Lady Byron. Ada Byron came from a very privileged family. Her mother's family had a political background as well as substantial estates and mining interests in the north of England. Through this privilege, Ada was able to access some of the greatest minds in the country. Her tutors included William Friend and Dr. William King, and she would often converse with them via letter discussing various algorithms and algebra. Women were discouraged from attending universities, society deeming it too much for a poor woman's brain to think of. But Ada's enthusiasm for her education meant her mother had to find more advanced teachers so she could continue her learning. Even at a young age, Ada had a scientific yet imaginative mind. Thanks to the latest developments of air travel, Ada had devised her own flying invention. With the hopes of writing a book about flyology, she looked at the wings of birds and developed her own machine using silk and feathers. She even planned on how she would power the machine using steam technology. In 1829, Ada contracted measles and was bedridden for months. Her only solace was her interest in mathematics and science. She would write to William Friend asking about rainbows and speculated how they were formed. She was introduced to Mary Somerville, who was the only known woman to practice her subject at university level, and for who the term scientist was coined. Somerville and Caroline Herschel would become the first female fellows of the Royal Astronomical Society and perhaps the only women in Britain to earn money from maths. When Ada had recovered, she would accompany the Somerville family to London's various science and literary societies, where in 1835 she met her future husband Lord William King and was introduced to Charles Babbage. King shared Ada's passion for scientific interests, especially in agriculture, and the two would often work together on various projects on the country estate. Adrian and William would go on to have 3 children between 1836 and 1839. William became the Earl of Lovelace in 1838, and despite her new title and responsibilities, Ada would continue with her mathematical studies. But because of societal expectations at the time, Ada had to rely on her scientist friends and colleagues to help her further her study. It was during her correspondence with Charles Babbage that Ada started to think about how computers could have a positive impact on society in the future. Babbage had already developed the difference engine, which was basically a giant calculator used to calculate successive values of formulas, but was limited by the number of digits it calculated. It used a series of cogs and steam to power and calculate, and the result would be printed onto paper. It was a brilliant piece of engineering requiring many accurately made components, and there were 8,000 in total. And even though Babbage had managed to raise £17,000 of government funds, the equivalent of £1.7 million today, after 10 years all he had to show for it was a large number of components and a small working demonstration machine. As Ada developed her mathematical mind, it became apparent that she needed someone to challenge her intelligence and answer her contemplative questions, and by 1845 was writing frequently to Augustus de Morgan, a leading British mathematician at the time. He would often encourage Ada to think outside of the box and to use creative thinking to achieve a result. It was during these letters that Ada would describe mathematical expressions as fairies and sprites, and while she wrestled with all the problems, she would describe certain equations as complete will-o'-the-wisps, thinking that they would be easy and tangible to grasp and understand, but vanish again into thin air. Ada was an enthusiastic student, but she often wished that she could calculate and solve problems much quicker. She would often belittle herself, saying that she wasn't good enough, and often De Morgan would point out that despite her speed it was still impressive. He would point out that rushing things to try to understand them would often lead to her making mistakes. Ada soon began to believe him, reporting to her mother that even though she worked slowly, she was more or less to make a mistake and come to learn that rushing things didn't work. Ada devoted herself to learning, however. She also found time for singing and playing instruments such as the harp, guitar and piano, and going to the opera, but she often complained about her children being needy and sent them away to her mother or to one of their houses with her staff. She enjoyed horse riding and started gambling, racking up loads of debts. She became ill quite often and would spend this time convalescing and developing her knowledge in mathematics and mathematical thinking. Ada became more confident as she learned, and soon she was pointing out errors in publications, especially those who were her tutors. In the mid-1830s, Charles Babbage started working on his analytical engine. It had been designed to compute large formulaic calculations and, in modern times, would have been classed as what we now know as a general-purpose computer. It was never built, but many aspects of its design were shown in drawings and notations. It would have been programmed using punch cards and would have been a massive 15-foot high and at least 20 feet long, all powered by steam. After the Italian Luigi Menabrea had written notes based on Babbage's lectures in French, Ada had been tasked to translate them, and she wrote detailed notes explaining how the analytical engine worked, showing a deeper understanding of how it worked and its contribution to society. But because Ada was a woman, she couldn't be seen as a published author, so she would only sign her notes ALL. Of the 66 pages of the published paper, 41 were Ada's extensive notes. Ada considered how the machine could be programmed using punch cards and created a table of instructions that directed the engine to fetch data from the store, complete calculations via the mill, and move back again, according to what information was presented on the cards. The paper demonstrated Ada's attention to detail, but what's really important about this paper is that in Ada Lovelace's notes, she began to talk about the machine and how it could be used to act upon things that weren't just numbers, but things that would help society as a whole. She talked about how the machine could create sounds and harmony and musical composition, and how the engine may compose a labyrinth and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. She thought about how we could do algebra and how it could create patterns. Ada and Babbage were well ahead of their time. Their ideas couldn't come into actual fruition until nearly 2 centuries later. As they continued to write each other, it became clear that the relationship became strained. Babbage wanting to complete the notes, whilst Ada would insist on improvements that could be made. But Babbage and Lovelace still remained firm friends. During her mid-30s, Ada was diagnosed with uterine cancer and was prescribed a cocktail of alcohol and narcotics to help her deal with the pain. She died just aged 36 on the 27th of November 1852, and she was buried beside her father at Hucknall in Nottinghamshire, and her mother had a monument dedicated to her in Leicestershire, where a copy of her poem The Rainbow can be seen. In all the years her mother spent trying to suppress Ada's creative mind, it was this mind that allowed her to think outside of the box. She was a forward thinker. She understood the importance of education being accessible to everyone. She understood the importance of women in education and science. So who was Ada? She was a pioneer. She was a creative thinker. She was a genius. She was a truly unique person who saw the benefits of using her creativeness when approaching science and mathematics to solve problems. And it was with this creative mind she envisioned a future where the analytical inference engine and their successors would help society and how it could support a growing need for creativity. But I do wonder if she realised just how accurate her thinking was, and I'd like to think that if Ada was alive today, she saw how much we use computers in our everyday lives. I think she would be happy that her predictions had come true. enjoyed this video, learnt something about Ada Lovelace, and don't forget it's Ada Lovelace Day every second Tuesday of October. Thanks for watching.